Hello, hello, welcome. Welcome folks that are coming in. Give everyone a moment. Hello and welcome. Good afternoon. Hope you had a good break. Welcome to the Reimagine American Schools Designing a Learning Community workshop. We're going to begin pretty promptly. So if you're coming from the ballroom, please make sure that your camera and mic are turned off. And if you don't know how to do that, just simply exit out of that browser window. Today, our guest will be giving a presentation, and while that is happening, attendee mics and cameras should be off during that time. But after the presentation, we'll jump into a Q&A discussion where you can leave your questions in the chat. And I will be using the chat as an admin to let all attendees and speakers know that there are 5 minutes left and 2 minutes left of the session remaining. So out of respect for everyone's time, we have a hard stop at 2:25 p.m. And without further ado, I'll kick it to Ron.
Hey, thanks, Madison. Well, as people are coming into the auditorium, I just want to say welcome. We're excited to have been selected to present to the AAO conference this year. Hope you all are having a rich and remote experience. I have a lot of respect for the AAO as part of the original formation of the group years ago. And I'm very proud to see the work that Lynn and Woody and their teams have done in creating a really amazing international network that didn't exist before. So these are important opportunities to share and to learn from each other. I know some of you, others haven't met. I'm Ron Bogle. I am president and founder of an organization called the National Design Alliance. And in that organization, we have one primary program, and that's Reimagine Americas Schools. We're really building on work that was first launched by the American Architectural Foundation over 15 years ago. And the Reimagine Americas Schools leadership team has been working together for almost a decade and a half. We have really been advocating for the role of design in creating active 21st century learning environments. And until this year, Reimagine Americas Schools was continuing to do our work in the field, in communities, working directly with students and teachers and superintendents and principals, putting together teams of the nation's top school design architects to organize charrettes and design thinking workshops to help educators create a new vision for their schools. Our architecture teams do this pro bono. We call it design jury duty. So the good news about, that was humor. The good news about the situation with school design and construction before the pandemic was that we were on track to spend $50 billion on renovated modernization and new construction. It's historic amounts of money. The bad news is that unfortunately, most of the schools that are being designed today really are based more on a 1950 model instead of a 2050 model. And our central mission and charge at Reimagine Americas Schools is to change that. And so we're working aggressively to change that reality. But during the pandemic, obviously, we had to work differently. And so we've spent our year really studying the issues that have been uncovered during the pandemic that are likely to change public education. There are really 4 areas that we've been studying this year. One is the whole issue of equity and inclusion and design for equity and inclusion in the learning environment. Another area we've been looking at is the emerging merging of technology and environment. How can technology and environmental design work better and more seamlessly to improve the learning environment? The third area we've been looking at is the whole issue of crisis preparedness. When we have crises and emergencies in our cities, it's often the school that we lean on to provide additional support within the community for housing or food or health or shelter. So how can we design schools that are more able to convert to those purposes during those times? And finally, we've looked at the whole issue of active learning. STEM, STEAM, maker, hands-on, project-based, different kinds of learning styles than when we think about the traditional 1950s classroom. The overarching theme of the year is really thinking about community. How do we link school and community together more effectively? How do we create more support beyond just the traditional role of pre-K through 12, so that we're really reaching out to parents, families, and institutions within communities, especially in those neighborhoods that are underserved or under-resourced. So today's focus is really going to be looking at that very issue. Last year, we were engaged with an organization in Pittsburgh called Remake Learning, and 4 funders who are the Hellman Foundation, the Benedin Foundation, the Grable Foundation, and our principal underwriter, the Schmidt Foundation. We were brought together to work with 16 agencies and organizations within, I would say, the greater Pittsburgh area, but it really extended from northern West Virginia to southwest Virginia, southwest Pennsylvania, and Pittsburgh. And the agencies and organizations, some were schools, but they were churches, they were community organizations. They really represented across the spectrum. Do somebody join us?
Okay, that's right. I got on late. I've been in and out because it's been a couple busy days here. So
okay, you might want to mute your mic and turn off your video.
Weren't you part of that presentation? No.
I think we're in on a private conversation.
No.
I think there's some people that are still in the ballroom and they still have their mic.
So we did work with these 16 organizations under the direction of Carrie Leonard, our director of architecture. We put together teams of pro bono architects, both a national team and a Pittsburgh area team. We had over 20 architects who volunteered to support this initiative and representing over 12 architecture firms. And this was a community-wide initiative that really created a series of centers that not only serve the community through their own programs, but they will act as a hub to connect with other future organizations that seek to do similar activities within that region. So this was a transformative story, but there's another part of the story, and that is these projects were done on a very limited budget, $50,000 each to convert underutilized or unused space or library space to a new purpose and a new function. Before we introduce our team today for the day's panel, I'd love to hear about where some of you all are from. So go to your chat and say hi and tell us what town you're in. And I'd remind you again that if your video is on, you're asked to shut that down. And if your audio is on, please mute yourself. So let's hear from the chat room. Say hi, everybody, and tell us where you're zooming in from. We get to know you a little bit better that way. And while we're doing that, I'd like for our team to introduce themselves, and we'll be turning it over to them for the remainder of the program. So Josh Lee, why don't we start with you? Joshua Lee from CMU, Pittsburgh.
Sure. Thanks, Ron. My name is Joshua Lee. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Architecture at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, as Ron just said. I also do pro bono work as part of my public interest design firm labeled Protean Design Collaborative. So that's how I get roped into this project. I'll pass it off to Emily.
Great, thanks, Josh. My name is Emily Zarnecki. I work with JCJ Architecture. We're a national firm, but I am located in Hartford, Connecticut. My primary role is a senior interior designer, and I have been focusing on educational projects, K through 12, higher ed, public-private, for over 20 years. Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Dursa. I'm an architect and associate principal with KG&D Architects. in Mount Kisco, New York. We do hundreds of thousands of square feet of schoolwork every year, and focusing a lot on next generation education. Prior to joining KG&D Architects, I was the founder and global chair of HOK Impact, which is HOK's response to global social responsibility.
Right. Thank you all, Emily and Sarah and Josh, for being a part of not only the program in Pittsburgh, but today's program. We'll be doing a deep dive on 2 of the projects and lightly touching on some of the other 16 or the other 14. Before we turn the program over to Carrie, we will be doing a Q&A later in the panel. So if you have questions, I'll be monitoring the chat, and to the degree that I'm able, I'll try to pass them on to the panel. So Carrie and I have been working together for over 15 years. We both started in junior high school. Carrie is the Director of Architecture for Reimagine Americas Schools, but also has his own practice in Chicago. Carrie, thanks for your hard work in putting the panel together, and we look forward to your presentation going forward.
Great. Thank you, Ron, and thanks everybody. I'm gonna see if I can get this to work and share my screen. What we're going to try to do here today, and here you see the panelists, and also you'll see our info at reimagineschools.us. That email address, if anybody has any questions about the presentation, about any of the projects, please send us an email and we'll get back in touch with you as needed. So Ron went through some of the numbers and some of the people who were involved with the Blueprint for Learning project. And you see that in the screen that's up, but over 200 people in total were involved in the various events, and it really created some rich opportunities for the educators and the architects to connect, share ideas about the relationship between space and learning, and that's an important part of what we do. If you add in all of the architects who worked with our 13 local firms, we were probably just under 100 architects who were engaged. As Ron mentioned, they provide pro bono service, but everyone who participates walks away from these events just really thrilled at the opportunity. It's hard work, but it's very rewarding work that gets done during our events. Talk a little bit about Remake Learning, our partner in Pittsburgh on this project, and the Blueprint for Learning program. As Ron mentioned, there's a strong network in the Pittsburgh area amongst the Remake Learning partners. It is schools, but it also is out of school time organizations, and the types of institutions that participate, really help us think about what a learning community is. There's programs that happen in schools, early childhood programs, museums, libraries, and other out of school time organizations. And if you consider all these organizations holistically, they really get to a strong community learning environment, a strong support for students and families. And then again, you see the 3 funding foundations who put together the $800,000 in total for the 16 $50,000 projects. So the process started with a grant application to Remake Learning, and these are some of the questions that were part of the letter of intent, the first submittal. One of the things I think call attention to is really the term little bets, and this is something that they talk about in their organization. It's what are those first small steps that are being taken to make a long-term impact. It really is about just getting started with something, getting started with change. And that's where I think our $50,000 projects also had a strong connection, because each of these was about just getting started with changing the physical environment to reflect the curriculum and the needs of the organizations. There also was a focus on getting students involved, engaging young people in the process. And I think that's an important part of that as well. I'm going to try to give an overview of the process before we do a little bit deeper dive. And then after a quick overview, Sarah and I will share the group design work that was done in September. It's kind of peel back the curtain and look at what happened inside the room. Joshua and Emily are going to tell you the story of a single project from the Design Institute through construction. And then we're going to see a short video on another completed project. What we really are trying to do is give you an insight into the rich content in the projects and the depth of engagement in the design process between the schools, between the design team and the cohort members. So it started with a Reimagine Americas Schools led conceptual design process. It took place during two major events, the Space Design Summit and the Design Institute. And at the same time, we started the recruiting effort to bring the local Pittsburgh area architects into the process and worked with a group there to facilitate that process. After the Fall Design Institute, the Reimagine Americas Schools team led a series of calls to transfer the design concepts and project knowledge to the architects who would work on and implement the projects. We want to thank all those Pittsburgh firms who participated. The projects themselves were all scheduled to start construction in the spring. Many of them have been completed. You'll see some of that. Some have been delayed. You can imagine the added complexity and added challenges that came to these projects because of the pandemic. So to start with, to talk about the Space Design Summit, this particular activity took place over 2 days. There were over 100 participants. It was a kickoff for the Blueprint for Learning application process, but it consisted of a series of presentations, tabletop work, group activities, and the exercise, along with the Blueprint for Learning questions, all served as a basis to give the potential applicants, potential grantees, give them a new lens to view their programs and spaces, and to make that connection between the physical space and learning. It also was a slight pause in those who had already started thinking about what they might do to include space and the learning environment in their thinking. This event was held at the Phipps Conservatory of Botanical Gardens and Botanical Gardens. It's a beautiful space. And one of the things that we found important as we do our work at Reimagine Americas Schools is to hold design events in places of good design, in places that really highlight some of the activity types of spaces that we talk about in our events. The next activity was the Design Institute. And so after Remake Learning and the funding foundations had selected the 16 cohort members from over 100 applications, that we sat down with them, and I'm using the term cohort members. That's what we've come to call the group of grantees. We may use the term clients or owners also in our discussion, but it's all the same thing. It's the people who received the grants that we worked with. So in this second event, this was held at the Pittsburgh Children's Museum. Again, another wonderful environment for hosting an event, a design event. And part of the work day one was to make sure that each team could really articulate what is that 10,000 foot level vision for reimagining their spaces. And this took place over 3 days with whole group work and the design charrette. And one of the keys to our design process in the client team meetings, having the client teams make presentations and to talk about their projects and what they wanted to get out of the charrette. So it really did reinforce a collaborative work with educators and architects. And we also, in having the design team make the presentations the cohort member make the presentations at the end of the process, it started to give them the language with which they could share these new ideas back when they went to their organizations and had to talk further about this. So we're going to look at very quickly the list of 16 projects. And I think you can see the wide variety of group boys and girls clubs, social service organizations, school districts, libraries, and a school for the deaf. This really presented a wide array of projects to work with. And we grouped them into 4 groups of 4 projects each. And the idea was that the different project teams would work together collaboratively on each other's projects. So not only did they have the expertise of the design teams that were in the room, they also had the expertise and voice of their cohort members and who they were working with. This was also intentional to help drive home that network aspect, that when all these projects were done, they could serve as beacons and reach out to other organizations. So understanding who their fellow cohorts were and what their design challenges were was really a beginning step in helping them to tackle their own design challenges. Here you can see the different types of projects, a large number of learning hubs, reimagined libraries, along with maker and STEAM spaces. And I think that is reflective of what we see in all of our work in the educational sector, with the need for active learning spaces to be created now to have hands-on learning by doing those types of activities and learning activities. There's also a number of projects that focused on outdoor or indoor-outdoor learning spaces, and I think that's another important aspect of what we see in the design work that we're involved with. So I'd like to bring Sarah up to the screen and talk a little bit about our design group. Sarah and I worked with Dan Engen, a local Pittsburgh architect, and we had 4 cohort members within our group. And as I mentioned, we all kind of explored and worked together on each person's project. And we had a wide variety of members from our different owner teams. You can see we had 3 students from the Riverview School District. These are not facilities people. These are not people who were well-versed in design. So it was really helpful to have everybody together, to have the architectural support. Maybe, Sarah, you want to give a little bit more background on the process?
Sure, yeah. So if you want to go to the next slide, as Carrie mentioned, the groups came to us with already having done so much research on their own, and they really had a strong knowledge about their users, their communities, their clientele, and the spaces that they were looking at, if they were spaces that they had already been using. And this is beneficial in a couple of ways. One, for the logistics and the quantifiable needs that these groups had. So for example, Attack Theater was a dance troupe, and they know they needed a sprung floor, and they needed specific lighting and sound. Human Services knew they had issues with acoustics and storage, and so things like that really kind of helped to set the tone for specific things that would be needed. But then these groups, they also came with us, and they had more abstract needs, things like student agency or ownership of spaces, or creating a playful space, or creating a connection to the community, things that didn't have necessarily a design or a tangible thing associated with, and we had to expand on that and figure out what that would mean. So we spent, at least 45 minutes after their presentations just asking questions about their programs, about their spaces, about their users, and really trying to figure out kind of what they were about. What was their motivation for wanting to do this space in the first place? What were the current facilities, assets and limitations? What were the end users' needs, and kind of what was the culture of the community? And how can we make these spaces special? So the Human Services Center Corporation, they had an existing space as a 660 square foot space, and they already knew this was being used for in their building already. So they knew the programs that had to be in there. They knew the students that had to be in there. It was both an after-school program space for about 100 students, and they used it as a lunchroom for their camp in the summer for 150 students. So knowing it so well, they knew all the problems that this room had. The acoustics were bad. There was not enough storage, and it wasn't conducive to their needs. There's no pinup space. And they also knew coming into this how they wanted this space to feel for their students. They wanted to make their students feel valued in this space, and to have a place where students wanted to spend time. So this needed to be a comfortable space and with really thoughtful design. Next slide. So after hearing all of these ideas or getting all the information from the groups and kind of answering all these questions, it opened up a huge range of ideas that we could do. You could do this, you could do that. And what we really was really exciting was that at that point, everybody was warmed up, and everybody from each group was contributing and asking questions, and it could be this, and what if you did that? So many ideas and concepts. We really had to start to focus it at that point as to what is the major thing, the big idea that we want to get accomplished, and what are the things that will really help to support that main goal. Is it getting young students excited to learn, or continuing this legacy of community engagement and enrichment, or creating the classroom of the future? And once we latched onto that, then we could really start to support that big idea. And all while we were talking, we were creating design sketches to kind of outline what this big idea is, what are the flows and connections to the space, and is what the group is saying that they need, is that really aligning with the space that they have, and how do we kind of synchronize that, which kind of led, all of it in part led to this big aha moment that we feel like, yes, that's what we want to do, and that's going to be the primary focus of the space. And if you go to the next slide, Carrie and I both thought was really interesting was this, in Allegheny Valley School District, they came to the presentation talking about their library space and how it was, underutilized but functional, and they really wanted to kind of focus on that. And through the course of the questioning and the sketching and the ideation of it, we realized that the library was fine. There really wasn't anything wrong with it. But what would really make the most impact for what they're trying to do is the Rachel Carson conference room, which is just kind of planned north of this. And focusing on that smaller space could really help them to create this classroom of the future and kind of empower the students to take ownership of that. And then also, could create connections to the cafeteria, across the hall, to the library, and be this really transformative hub for this part of the school.
I mention one thing. One of the amazing things is these charrettes. Sarah and I had never worked together. Dan Engen, that never worked with him before this event, and all of a sudden you've got three architects who are working together in a room with clients, but the shared passion for K-12 education and for educational spaces, just that deep love for the work that we do, all of a sudden it just seems easy to work together in the flow. And Dan was a wonderful sketcher, and the idea that these images could be created in the moment and then shared to help illustrate the ideas with the cohort team members really just became a great way to facilitate a discussion and an understanding of the impact on space on the learning process.
Yeah, and a great way to capture all of the kind of the abstract ideas that they're being talked about. And we had two school districts in our cohort group. And what I thought was interesting is that Allegheny Valley really talked a lot about the student agency and activism and giving students a voice. But Riverview School District actually had 3 students who did their presentation and who created the entire concept for this project. They were high school students who wanted to create a space in the elementary school for students to have an exciting, creative space. We kept on talking about permission to get messy, and giving them a space that was unlike anything else that they had, making space that not only was for the students but only fit the students, having secret entrances that only they could fit through. So these are a couple of images of the before spaces that really, nothing incredibly fun or student-centric or 21st century next gen about it. And then these are a couple of the images afterwards, looking at innovative ways to create storage and bringing in color and making spaces that fit just them.
I couldn't quite get them a secret entrance, but I think that what the architect did with the colored glass at the entry there, just to try to create a little bit of intrigue. And obviously this is an in-progress photo with none of the furniture being installed yet. They really were able to take this small space and turn it around dramatically. So I would like to bring up Emily and Joshua and have them talk about the Center That Cares.
Thank you, Carrie. So just to give a little bit of background on the Center That Cares, it's a learning center in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, somewhat of a disadvantaged area. This space is really, they support programs like before and after care, after school programs that are really helpful to the students who, after they leave school, many of them don't have anywhere to go. They created this program for students so that they have this really exciting space and place for learning different activities and really preparing them for the future workplace. Next slide. So when we met with the sorry, next slide, Karen. Oh, thank you. As the Design Institute, we got to really know the owners, the end users, those cohort members. They were very much like a family. They are reverend and people who are all about the students. And the next slide, please. So here you can see our team together. Like I mentioned, Reverend Glenn Grayson, Shanora Johnson, really passionate about their children, the children that come to the center. It's all about working with these students to prepare them. And they had a very clear vision, but they struggled with understanding how they could use this house that they had purchased, this 2-story house, which was in somewhat disrepair, and how they could create these maker spaces, learning hub areas, a place where the students could really go and connect in a global and culturally aware way. Next slide. So as Sarah had mentioned before, the big idea was really about bringing all of their aspirations together. And it was about making connections, creating collaborative environments, and providing those students with opportunities that they wouldn't normally have on a daily basis. And again, preparing them for the future workplace. Next slide. Which then led to the guiding principles, which was about access to technology. Many of these students didn't have technology at home and access platforms to reach out to the global community. And so they really wanted to provide a loving and supportive environment. They were there to listen to students and a space that felt safe and that they could learn many different activities, as well as bringing their families together as well. Next slide. So we pulled a number of different images together that could explain the character and the quality of their space. And really what came through was about a shared space that provided a variety of different types of spaces that really would describe their vision of a bright and colorful environment, multi-use, so that students could be in some quiet zones of reading, doing homework, working in small groups, all the way to more hands-on, very creative and active environment. Next slide. So with our design strategies, we took their initial visioning exercise that they had done on day one and really took a deep dive to get to the bottom of exactly what type of space they were looking for. Next slide. Which led to our initial design concepts where we took the 2 different floors and looked at zoning the floors so that they could create a quiet space on the upper floor and a more noisy and active zone on the first floor. They were very aspirational in that they wanted to include a new covered porch off the second floor. We kind of deemed that as phase 2 and said, unfortunately, the $50,000 is not going to build that, but how can we take that budget and create the environment within the building they have? And it truly became a furniture-based solution. So finishes, paint, flooring, and using some artwork, and then creating zones using that furniture, creating new egress paths through the space that would make more sense in the building. And so with that, next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Joshua, who is going to talk about what the next steps were and that they actually changed their space after the fact and how that outcome worked out in the end.
Great, thanks, Emily. So as I mentioned, it's at Carnegie Mellon University. I reached out immediately once we heard about this opportunity to a colleague of mine who's currently a PhD student studying school spaces, Annie Rentilla, and we got to work. Next slide. One of the first things that we learned was that unfortunately, the 2-story house was going to require significant investment in order to bring it up to code. So fortunately, they did have another space available. If you go to the next slide. which was an underutilized space in the back corner of the fellowship hall in the Wesley Center. And there was a bit of a switch from the aspirations that they had for the two-story house. This space is used for after-school activities for younger children, but most of the lessons and the sort of big ideas and design concepts that Emily had worked out and the rest of the team had worked out with them transferred relatively easily into this space. Next slide. And as you can see from this space, it is not quite appropriate for young children and learning. There was inappropriately sized furniture. It had no access really to technology and just wasn't a very fun space. So they also had aspirations of moving their desktop computers out of what had been converted from a storage space into that main space so the children could use it. They also were worried about access, so they added magnetic locks to these entry doors. Next. So for the final design, we made a number of changes. The biggest was that we enclosed the space with storefront glass. So it was still a part of the space visually, but it was also an attractor to this back corner. There's also various appropriately sized classroom appropriate furniture that was added, and as well as artwork that was added to the space. Next. It was also important, as Emily's mentioning before, that the kids wanted to feel comfortable. This is an after-school activity center, and so it wasn't just a school, rigorous solid furniture, but we also had some bean bags that were thrown into a corner as well to create a bit of a softer space where the kids could feel more relaxed. Next slide. We did end up going with Smith Systems furniture because it has a whole coordinated set of pieces that can act as storage and display space for maker spaces. They also use these wing desks, which can be reconfigured in a lot of different arrangements in terms of individual and collective working. And they're also height adjustable, which is great for this group. We looked at a number of glass enclosure systems, all the way from completely operable, where they would just fold away, to just single access. Ultimately, for our project, as we'll go to the next slide, for this project, it just wasn't possible to pull off a fully folding glass screen. So we did end up going with a traditional fixed but demountable system. So in the event that they do want to change the location of this space, there are other bays on the other side of this fellowship hall which could use this glass partition system. And most of the money, as you can see in the openings, division 8 here, went to the glass wall or glass partitions anyway. But a significant portion was also spent on relatively high-tech equipment, and then of course the furniture as well. Next. It was important. So this is a shot of what the space looks like now, and the space. CARES has been very good. They are deeply embedded in the Hill community, and they have agreed to share the lessons that they've learned from going through this process with other peer organizations around Pittsburgh. And I have every expectation that they will do so. In fact, my wife is teaches at the University of Pittsburgh and has had several of her students actually seeing how this facility works as part of their research projects. Next. So here you can see the sort of final project. And one of the big things to notice, of course, is the affordances of using laptops as opposed to desktops. They could be used in as individual or collective modalities all across the room, even on the soft furniture in the corner, which is great and really comfortable for the children. Next. There we go. I also mentioned the wedge-shaped tables, which could be arranged in many different configurations. Next. And it was also, CARES also acquired a couple of manipulative tables. The one seen here in the lower left is for a gravity table so that they can assemble and test various sort of derby cars in the space as well. So just kind of a fun, but also learning while doing. And next. So you can see we packed a lot into a fairly small space. It is, although no images of kids are in this picture, used as very active and changeable space. Next slide. And it's come to be known as the Blue Room in the corner. And it is a separate and attractive space for young children. We are currently working with CARES to also add some additional custom artwork graphics to the glass. So we look forward to moving forward together on that. Next. So now we'll see a short video about the campus laboratory school at Carlow University.
To stay relevant in a rapidly changing world, educational architecture has to evolve in response to emerging trends in teaching and learning. Burkhardt Horn Architects was pleased to partner with Remake Learning and Reimagine Americas Schools as part of a national initiative to develop a new model for the design of 21st century learning spaces.
My name is Jessica Webster, and I am the head of school for Campus Laboratory School. And so I oversee and supervise and support the teaching and learning of students here, K through 8. The Campus Laboratory School is situated on the campus of Carlow University. We are a laboratory school, which means that students from the education department are often in the building as practicum students, doing observations and student teaching. We partner with the university to share spaces and for opportunities for our students that they normally wouldn't get in a traditional school setting. So to begin with, the space felt dark. We were blocking some of our best features, which would be the stained glass windows around us. They were blocked by bookcases and inaccessible. The seating was not comfortable for students. It was difficult to find materials in the space. There were tons of books, but difficult to locate what you needed, and not conducive to students being able to do instructional activities in the space or to hang out with friends to do work, or projects, or anything of that nature. I think the best part was working with our architectural team, which was Burkhardt Horn. Having their knowledge of what educational spaces could look like and understanding how all the different pieces work together to design an overall aesthetic was extremely important to us. They were also really, it was really beneficial how they also helped us with figuring out furniture, layout, and just making sure that the project stayed on time, was on schedule. Those are all extremely important elements, and they were very responsive to our questions and our needs as we went along. And then it also just gives us a hub that becomes like our community center. So this is a place that faculty can gather for meetings. It's going to be comfortable for everybody, and also celebrations. And so that's how we view this space, as really like the hub of the school. It represents the heartbeat of who we are, and really reflects our mission and our values.
I appreciate you bearing with my my lack of technical prowess on some of this. Ron? Oh, you're on mute, Ron.
Thank you. May I just ask a question of the panel, Carrie?
Please, it's all yours.
So I think some of the audience might be interested in hearing a little bit more about the format of a charrette. What is it that we're doing and who's in the room with you? I know Carrie talked about the cohorts or the clients. It's my impression that most of the cohorts were not highly experienced clients, hadn't done a lot of work together before. So at a very high level, because we've got about 15 more minutes together, Just a quick kind of sketch of what a charrette is and what do the educators actually do? Sarah, do you want to take a dive at that?
Sure, yeah. So I think where the educators really brought their strengths into this, even though they hadn't participated in this type of activity before, was kind of their knowledge of their own spaces and asking the right questions of the other groups about how they're used and who's using them. And I think that they were really instrumental in kind of helping to create the right questions and kind of formulate what then Carrie and I and Dan were able to take to translate into design solutions, you know, at this high level still, because we were just sketching and didn't do like a deep dive into the design. But I think the information that the educators brought really kind of shaped how the design was emerged from that.
Josh, how would you describe the mechanics of the design charrette?
Well, I didn't participate in this particular version of it, but yeah, it does seem to be a fast and loose process where there's a lot of learning. Now, architects generally facilitate the discussion and lead that discussion to achieve specific aims that we need to get in order to move forward. We have to sort of translate those ideas into space. And that's really the focus via drawings and discussions and diagrams that ultimately do find their way into construction documents.
I think one of the advantages with this group of the cohort members is that because they had to put together the application for the grant, they had already started to think deeply about their programs and what they might want to accomplish, the different learning activities. And so coming in as having a clearer understanding of their needs, they were able to articulate those, and then the architects could really help them bring those needs to life with the drawings and translating their needs into physical space or physical changes that could improve an environment.
What do you suppose this approach allows that maybe a more traditional approach to design would prevent?
I think it allows a great number of ideas to be put down very quickly. It doesn't judge those ideas, but just gets them out on the table so that people can react to them. I think it has the opportunity, as we did, to have a large number of voices. There were people seated at that table who might not normally be in a discussion on the design of a space. The student voices, some of the program uses, and having a wide number of voices and different views represented in there just brings a richness into a much deeper understanding of what the problems are to be challenged. Those are my initial thoughts.
So we talk about aha moments, which are moments of great discovery or awareness. And those are usually a lot of fun because people tend to emote when they have an aha moment. There are also pivotal moments where something really important and critical happens that might turn the whole direction of the design conversation. Can you share either aha moments or pivotal kind of turning points in the process that you experienced and why they were important or how they affected the process? Joshua?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Emily.
I was just going to jump in on that. When we were doing some of the charrettes, one of the groups, the School for the Deaf, we were looking at the layout for the space that they were looking to transform into a new learning technology space that had a lot of millwork. And so the idea was, well, if we take this wall down, we take out all this millwork, how does that classroom become? And they were thinking, okay, the teaching wall here and this and that. And we started talking about, well, what if there is no teaching wall? What if the teacher is in the center? Because the students who are hearing impaired need to see the teacher. They need to see the lips, the words, coming out of their mouth. And when you're at the front of the room versus, students in the back may not see that. And so we started pulling images of classrooms that had that more active learning environment. For example, Steelcase has their active learning classroom. And once we showed them that, and we showed that the teacher could be in the center of the room and see all of the students, that was that really exciting moment where they said, oh, you mean I don't have to teach just at the front of the room? And it really became a pivotal moment in that discussion for them.
I'll add to that just a little bit, because we had a transition going from the 2-story house immediately to the basement space, which was immediately a shocking revelation to them as an organization that does a lot of good, but doesn't necessarily know the ins and outs of architecture. So when we had to break the news to them that, oh, it's just not going to happen in this space that that you had planned for. But when we got to the new space and we started talking about the design concepts that had been worked out earlier and trying to situate that within the space, there was an immediate turn, which was great. So it was really great to have that that charrette process feeding into the ability to envision. It's a old church basement, right? So imagining that space as a new and innovative learning space.
Good. So as we move into the last few minutes, I want to do kind of just a round robin to capture any key learnings that you want to share before we end our conversation. I kind of like to start it off if I can. I think one of the key learnings is the diversity of participation is really essential. Not only does it bring more ideas to the process, but it also has a certain authenticity that really makes the design outcomes more a part of the community. So it may not be as easy, but when you involve students, as we did, and parents, teachers, classroom teachers who say, I've never designed a building before, principals, these are the unusual voices. And I think there's a tendency to go to high power, high passion people. So the superintendent certainly would be a person in that category, or the head of the public school foundation. But the low power, high passion people need to have a place at the table also. So I think that's an integral part of the sort of secret sauce that needs to be a part when you're engaging the community. The other thing that I think is a good lesson from this is, so when the pandemic is over and educators are beginning to think longer term again, there are many who fear that we'll simply go back to the way we've always done it. And especially if you don't have a budget. And so I think what the Pittsburgh project did was demonstrate that architects working with passionate educators and community leaders can create very exciting solutions on a very limited budget. And I think that that helps us tell our story from the architecture and design world, that we're not just looking for the $30 million solutions. We can make things happen when the budget may be a little bit skinny. And I think the final thing is the power of the architect as a vision maker. Architects tend to work with clients, but often not the individuals that we worked with in Pittsburgh. And I think it helped people understand that architecture as a profession is multidimensional, in addition to creating multidimensional spaces, that architects bring a lot of leadership to the community. So the final thing I would say, and I think the reason that AAO wanted us to present, was that this involved the whole community, but the architecture community was a central player. It took the funding and philanthropic community. It took nonprofit support. But I think that the things that were accomplished would not have been accomplished had it not been for the architecture teams that we put together. So it's a great way for you to engage your community if you are an architectural leader in your community, or if you're a design educator, maybe you got some ideas today about how you can make a STEM space or a maker space on a budget. So those were the walkaways that I think we have from this. Josh, why don't we start with you, and we'll do our round robin over the next 7 minutes.
Great. For me, it was the informal network. I'm fairly new to Pittsburgh. Fortunately, I was able to partner pretty quickly with Annie, who's been here for quite a while, working on her PhD. And she had a connection to Franklin Interiors. Franklin Interiors was able to provide at cost some of the furniture. So that was just a financial savings for us. But also in terms of organization, they were very familiar with the systems furniture that would be appropriate. So that was very fortuitous. There's also been a large number of course, the Graysons, well, Shore Johnson and the Graysons are very intimately connected in the Hill District and Pittsburgh in general. So they were able to reach out and get things done on the project that would have been cost prohibitive if we had to sort of go through official channels. So for example, like getting the painting done and replacing the fan and those kinds of things. So I've also benefited just from the growth of my personal network through the project with, again, I mentioned my wife teaching at Pitt, and also being able to see the space being utilized by her own students. So that's been really fantastic. So utilizing all those informal connections and networks that already exist and fusing new ones was really a big takeaway for me.
Emily.
So as an interior designer, working with the architects was, that's part of what I do every day. But in that setting, I think it just helps bring another dimension and a different perspective, a slightly different perspective. We're all kind of in that world, but we all specialize in certain areas. And so working with those clients, and I completely agree that having those cohorts together, the groups of 4, was so beneficial. You get so much insight from each other. I mean, people were sharing phone numbers, sharing websites, sharing information, and just being able to research on the fly right there, show images, and bring up some of the work that maybe we've done to show, oh, that we've done this before, that this might benefit you. And then other groups say, oh yeah, I kind of like that too. What is that? That was I thought that was really exciting for me to be part of. And I just loved the energy of everybody and the collaboration amongst the entire group of all the way across.
Sarah?
For me, I think it's seeing how passionate all of these cohort groups were about their spaces and how much they wanted to give to their students and their communities was really powerful. And I think that helped a lot to shape the conversations that we had and the questions that we asked, and what does a playful space look like, or what does an empowering space look like, and using those as kind of the overarching principles to hammer in and get to all of the needs. So how do the needs of the users support the aspirations of the directors of these projects, and then how does that translate into a built environment? And I think that seeing, for me, and I think for everybody else in the room too, seeing how all of those pieces fit together to create a cohesive whole was really, really inspiring.
Gary, you want to wrap us up?
Sure. I think there's 2 words: trust and empathy. Those really come across in the whole process working well. And then from an empathy point of view, the students from Riverview who were high school students, and they wanted to create this space for an elementary school to help promote STEM learning in those kids and have them better prepared coming into high school. But they spoke to the superintendent from the adjacent district who wanted to do a student-centered space and didn't have students there. And the superintendent actually, listened intently to what these students had to say. They were so articulate and so caring about what they were. So, that was one piece of it. And from a trust point of view, maybe I'll leave it on a lighter note. We had, as Sarah mentioned, we had a TAC leader was in our group. And at the end of our session, they actually led us through a dance exercise. So here you had a group of people who just spent 2 days together in a room. We all stood up. And speaking personally, I would never do that if given the choice. but they led us through a series of dance movements. So, you know, we had built a real comfort level with each other, and it had really formed as a cohesive group. And I think that's really one of the advantages of this process is you're digging in, you're jumping in, you're trying to solve problems together, you trust each other, you listen carefully, you're empathetic to other points of view. You can get so much more accomplished if you just bring those two attributes to the table.
So seeing Carrie dance burned an image into my mind that I haven't been able to erase over the last year. So thank you all, Emily, Josh, and Sarah and Carrie. Thank you for the work on this wonderful project. Back for those of you in your communities, if you think there may be some application of this program in your own town, please let us know. We've provided the contact information. And the last comment, I want to compliment our audience. We have not had one drop off in the last hour. So that either means you were napping or you were on the edge of your seat listening to our panelists. Thank you all, and thanks AAO for letting us participate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before people run away, and I think Madison, you're going to say the same thing. This is me flailing my arms to say, please return to the conference room using the link that you have in the chat. We do have some closing remarks that we'd like to include everybody in. So before you run away for a slightly longer weekend, let's all come back together one more time in the conference room, and we will see you in just a few minutes.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much, Ron. This was